Hey everyone, we're going to get started now. Thank you all so much for coming out on this gloomy day. I'm very excited to present to you the first in a four-part series, In Unity We Rise, a series honoring Black History Month. There's information on the remaining parts of the series on the table, so please check that out. We also have bread today in the back from Rise Up Bakery. Rise Up is one of San Francisco's many amazing Black-owned businesses, so please try their breads, check out their website, tell your friends, and head on down to Rise Up and support this amazing business. So next I'd like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Sheryl Davis. Dr. Davis has been the executive director for the Human Rights Commission since 2016 here in San Francisco. She is also an author and an educator. Today she is presenting to us Free to Sing, the Power and Gift of Song. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Davis.
Good morning. Well, I am so grateful for this opportunity to share with you all a little bit. And thank you so much, Tony, for the invitation. So I'm going to get right to it because I probably won't get all the way through it because I love to talk. And I probably will take up most of my time sharing my own stories here. So I wanted to start with this definition of free and this picture of Frederick Douglass, who really did a lot of work around freedom and movement and access. And the thing that I wanted to really hone in on today is the power of song, how we use song so often to help us feel better and to kind of, even though we may not physically be able to do the things that we want to do, that the power of song allows us to have some autonomy and freedom. And uh, there are all these studies that talk about the impact of music on the body, on the mind, on the soul. And so, in the truest sense, music is freeing, right? Like it allows us to escape. I'm often drawn to a Maya Angelou poem that says, "The cage bird sits on a distant hill and sings of songs unknown of still, and that the cage bird sings of freedom." Right? And so this poem that she has talks about this bird in a cage, and yet he's still able to sing and dream of freedom, and that this power that of song gives him joy in that space where it may be a little bit less joyful. So wanted to really ground in this idea that freedom is not always just about freedom of movement, but that we can find freedom in other things, and that song has so often been a part of that. And so I wanted to also say, like, freedom and singing, like, that is a tool of resistance. And we've seen that throughout time, how songs have been used really to create a space for resisting the ways that things have been. And so we think about the songs of the civil rights movement. And I would say that a lot of that were born out of the experiences of the enslaved. And so when we think about it, the songs and things that I'll talk about a little bit today are about the hidden messages or the power of these spirituals and the songs that were used and the purpose of them. And I will say, as a child growing up, I maybe didn't understand the value of them when I was there. I knew that they were very moving, but I will say too that as a child, I was like, I wish they would stop singing those songs and maybe wanted something more upbeat and fast. And it wasn't until I got older that I had a better appreciation for them. And so I wanted to start with, and hopefully we'll be able to hear it as well, the tool of resistance and the hidden messages. And I wanted to be able to play these two songs that I thought were really sad when I was growing up, but then to look back and understand the message and the hidden story of them. So I'm going to start with this first one from the Wiley Choir. Um, um, And I want to have you, so that is one that was a remake by the Wiley Choir. And I wanted you to also be able to hear one that is more traditional. Really listen to the words because he's talking about, I couldn't hear nobody pray. Way down yonder by myself, I couldn't hear nobody pray. And it is both literal um, and metaphorical, right? It is a space around like literally, I'm not hearing anybody pray. Maybe there's so much sadness and depression, but I can find joy in this song. And the song goes on to talk about um, Daniel being delivered from the lion's den. So it starts with this kind of melancholy message, but it ends with there is hope, right? Like even in the midst of this, Daniel in the lion's den, he was delivered, and this hope and idea that they can also be delivered. But I wanted to play a more traditional version for you as well. Oh, we appreciate our veterans.
Play community gospel recording. It's good. We are, well, there's no volume. Sign view option. Percent. Side by side mode.
So when we think about the coded messages and the hidden stories in there, this was an opportunity to also criticize, right? Openly and in public in a way that you normally would not be able to. So the songs are also a way to be like, we're talking about how much we love God and Christianity, and I'm not hearing anybody pray, or I'm not hearing anybody actually practice what they preach. And so understanding that we should often look at the words and think about the dual meanings that could be a part of those songs. And so it makes me think about, there are a couple other songs and things when I think about Harriet Tubman. And Harriet Tubman was a very spiritual woman. And even though she had escaped slavery, kept going back to save others, she didn't have to. And she used song not just as a way, I often tell the young people, like there was no Twitter or X or social media, there were no flyers, there was no like her walking up to plantation saying, come go with me, right? So she would have to go to those spaces and use song. So she would maybe would do something like, meeting tonight, meeting at the old campground, meeting tonight, oh, meeting tonight, meeting at the old campground. So she could go there, she could sing that song. And again, it was hidden in, let me just turn that. I was like, I have an echo. It was a hidden message. It was hidden in plain sight. But it also was, it was a hidden message, but it was also this idea that folks could sing that. This is the way we pray at the old campground. This is the way we pray on the ground. They could say to themselves, okay, this is where I am, this is my life, but I can pray, I can stay hopeful, and I can use song, right? And so there are stories about Harriet Tubman being considered Moses of her people, that she would go back and she could save them and bring them to freedom in the way that Moses had done. And so there's a song, and I'm trying to see if I can remember it or do it. Tell old Pharaoh way down in Egypt land, let my people go. Let my people go. Right? Like, so they said she'd come and she'd sing that song. Again, encouraging those who maybe didn't want to take the risk. She's like, I'm here for you. I'm going to help you get to where you want to go. I was laughing the other day because I'm of the generation when Tony was out, and they had a song called "Hey Little Walter," but it was created and modeled after "Wade in the Water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water." So that song could be literal, where people were crossing over, and Harriet maybe would say to them, come on, there's trouble in the water, but we're going to get across it. We're going to make it. Or it could be metaphorical, where they're like, one day I'm going to be able to cross over from this life to a greater life, right? This messaging, this use of song was something to lift the spirits, or it was something to be a tool to help people escape and get to where they wanted to go. So that idea of the Jordan River might be just crossing over and getting to the north. But the Jordan River is deep and wide. I got a home on the other side. I was thinking this morning, I was like, when I was growing up, vacation Bible school, it didn't make sense to me at the time, but I just remembered the adults going, deep and wide, there's a fountain flowing deep and wide. As a little kid, it was great, but I didn't realize the context of it, right? That it is born out of something deeper, a message, a symbol, like it's deep and it's wide, right? And it might be hard to get over onto the other side. And for us, it was just about like being able to move our hands and move, because we were tired of sitting and listening to people talk, right? Like, so it had a dual purpose in that place as well. So the idea of call and response, and I think about it in the song that we heard earlier. And I always thought about call and response more as, and I was sharing with my good friend James that I'm really disappointed, because when I was growing up, they used to have these songs called Dr. Watts. And they were these songs that were all about call and response. And I was with a group of people the other day, and I asked how many of them were familiar with it, and nobody was. And so these old Dr. Watts were written and part of a hymnal, but they were used in the Black spaces as a way to teach the song. They were call and response. And so I'm really sad, because I'm not well versed in it. I know it when I hear it, and I'm not talented enough to necessarily do it. But the older people in the church would start the song, and people would repeat it after. Guide me, oh, thy great Jehovah, lead me through this barren land. And then people would go, God, and it would be this long meter that would happen. And again, as a child, I'd be like, oh my God, this song is never going to end, right? Because it's like somebody says it, and then people repeat it, and they take forever to even just repeat what he said really quickly. And now I'm like, I wish I had paid a little bit more attention, because it's so historic. And recently I was trying to research it and understand it. And what's interesting is that the person, Mr. Watts, who actually wrote the songs, wrote a lot of the songs that are in hymnals. And he wanted to bring more emotion to music, to song, and to the religious experience. And so he had given this and gifted this, and that it was a place and meant to be a way for folks to express their feeling, right? And so this call and response is now like not just what I thought about in terms of like the idea that you say something and repeat it back, but it really is the energy that we think about when we think about Martin Luther King Jr. and his I Have a Dream speech, and people like responding to what he was saying, right? affirming and agreeing and like celebrating what was being said. And that's really what was my Black Baptist experience, was all call and response. This idea that folks get up and say something and they want you to say amen back, right? They want you to affirm and confirm and validate what they are saying, and to do it in a very emotive way. And that is what call and response is. And so much of the idea of learning and religion and spirituality and music is this collective ritual. So call and response is that collective ritual where we're learning that when somebody says something, we clap back, we celebrate them, but it also gives a space for folks to be uniquely themselves, right? And so there's this research that was done about call and response, and they looked at Bible studies, and they talked about how when folks were in Bible study, they could read the scripture and everybody was afforded the opportunity to talk about how it connected in their own personal experience, right? There was no one way to interpret what that meant when you say, give us our daily bread, right? That giving us our daily bread for some folks may be about the resources and finances. For other folks, getting their daily bread may be literally getting pieces of bread, but a special type of bread, right? And so that was this call and response that said, you can come in and speak your truth, and we will celebrate you in who you are and how you express that and how you experience it. And so a choir is a lot, represents that a lot to me in terms of the clapping, right? Whether you're singing or whether you're backing up backing up the soloist, that they sing, you clap, right? And you join in and you celebrate. Like the response to the music is to clap. And they talk about some of this is also a way to incorporate what was being experienced in the New World with the West African traditions, right? How we bring that all together. It is collective participation. And so spirituals were this way to have collective participation, for us to feel unified even when we were spread out, when we were separated, when we maybe couldn't be in a place where we knew someone, but we could share the music, the song, and automatically feel like we were a part of something. And it was also this way to manage your own emotions and feelings. So there is, and I'll say more about him, a man named Benjamin Mays, who was the mentor to Dr. King and was the head of Morehouse College in Atlanta for many, many years. And he talks about the religious, what he calls the collective practice or religious techniques that helped people really be able to move through life through more challenging situations, and that collective ritual of addressing and building to support social movements, to relieve the stress and burden of injustice, but also to relieve the stress and burden of just day-to-day life, being able to pause for a moment and reflect and have that space. So I'm going to talk a lot about, as we move through this, the role of church and music, and it being more than just about imparting religious beliefs, but that in so many ways, I tell my son all the time, he got off so easy because when I was his age, I definitely was in church pretty much from 8 in the morning until 8 at night, if I was lucky. I had to go to church for Bible study and choir rehearsal and all these other things during the week. But it's also where I learned to sit down, to be quiet. It's where I learned how to read, because I had to do these Bible drills. You know, they'd line you up and you'd have to put your Bible in your hand, and they say, ready, at arms, and do all these things. And then they would say a scripture, and you'd have to open up, and the first one to the scripture would be like the winner of that contest. And whoever did that the most, got to the scriptures fastest, would get like a ribbon or something at the end of that. So it taught me a lot that I maybe didn't learn in school, right? Like it taught me how to be quiet, but it also taught me love and care, because so many people knew my name. So many people were excited to see me, right? They were like, oh, sit here, or, tell me how your week went. So it built community. And so part of this collective ritual of being in space with other people and sharing a belief is huge, right? Like, so it is also critical to hope and inspiration and being able to hold on in those challenging times. And it talks a lot, again, I mentioned Harriet Tubman, but Sundays were the one day when folks could kind of take pride in how they looked. They weren't going to be worried about doing some other stuff. They could be with other people. They could be celebratory, and they could enjoy themselves. And spirituals and music provided that space. And so Benjamin Mays, as I mentioned, was the mentor. He was an ordained minister. He was a teacher. And he talks a lot in his research about what he calls the Negro's church. And as we know, over time, we've gone between colored and Black and Negro and different names. And so during his era, the word was for Black was Negro. And he talked a lot about the ability to go to church, sing a song, and address an issue, but nobody knew that you were like criticizing them or addressing an issue. So these songs were very important for a level of autonomy to release the pent-up anger and frustration that someone had, right, in order to survive. And I often say to people, survival is the key. I'm like only here today because the folks who came before me were able to live long enough to like have a family. And so resistance sometimes is merely survival, right? Being able to still be here is huge. And so we may say folks didn't fight or they didn't do this, but resistance looks a lot of different ways. And so being able to sing and take the risk and even having joy in the midst of sorrow, like that is an act of resistance, and that should be celebrated. Because think about when you have been at your lowest point, how hard it must be to be so sad and still smile. How hard must it be to like feel like you can never like conquer something, or to be so like just burdened down and still be able to find something good? Like that is a strength. And that is a strength that I think we don't talk about enough. Some days, right, like it feels like just the world is on your shoulder, and maybe you turn on a song that kind of helps you shake it off, right? Or maybe there's a person that will sing a song to you that you'll think about that will help you be able to move through that. I want us to really think about the power of music, but also the power of joy. Joy is about the determination to not stay in the saddest situation that you are in, right? To be able to find hope in a hopeless situation. That's why I tell people all the time, spirituality for me is like it is non-negotiable. If I don't have an ability to think about something bigger than me, the ability to tap into something greater, the ability to hope and believe that things could be better, I would probably never get out of the bed. And we have to understand there are people that struggle with that. And how do we give them the tools and the resources that they need to be able to conquer really the frustration and the depression and the things that exist? And I believe strongly that prayer and music, like faith, music, and culture can help you achieve that. And that was really a lot of what Benjamin Mays was talking about, is that we created a space where this collective practice of singing, these collective rituals of praying and talking to each other, created community where we were able to keep believing, to develop leadership, and to release our emotions. So he was a researcher. He was a sociologist. He actually was very important in establishing, he established the Board of Education in Atlanta. So he was fundamental in that. And he actually, even though a lot of people don't know who he was, he and Dr. King had an agreement, whoever passed first would do the eulogy of the other. And so he actually eulogized Martin Luther King at his funeral. And he was known for talking about, he says the calamity of life is not achieving your dreams. The calamity of life is having no dreams to achieve. And I believe that that message is really what planted the seeds that we celebrate when we think about Dr. King. But here he was saying, like, we all have to be able to dream. When people lose their ability to dream, they have lost hope, and it really is hard to like live and function. So he was saying, even if you're living, if you don't have dreams, are you really living? And how do we create space that people believe, even in the worst of situations, that they can dream? And so he also went on to talk, which I can see, I was looking around here and just seeing what you have here. He talked about the importance of church. Yes, music and prayer was important, but the programs were important, right? Like I talked about being able to learn how to read or to be in space with each other. He talked about the like changing churches after slavery were not just about like coming and having this celebratory moment, but it was also about like meeting the needs of folks, putting in a gymnasium, playing basketball, doing volleyball, teaching young people, like giving them something to do. So he was talking about the evolution of the church to be able to meet the physical needs of people, not just the emotional, spiritual needs of people. And so recently, so that was this year I was able to go to Birmingham, and I was at the 16th Street Baptist Church. And, you know, some folks may remember that is where the bombing happened and the four little girls were lost. And they were going to church for a special service, right? Like they were in that place. And so church has even, it was just amazing to me to be in church on Youth Sunday, Children's Sunday, to have those young people and up moving and shaking and like proud to be in front of the church and to sing their song, and for the littlest one to have that microphone. And I was like, this reminds me of when I was little, this idea of learning to speak in front of people, singing in front of people. And the call and response was that as they were singing, no one was judging whether it was good or bad or whether she was holding the microphone right. They were celebrating her like joy, right? Her bravery to be able to get up in front of a crowd of people and sing. Right? Like that is still the institution. I think that is the feel of it, is that it doesn't look like maybe the way we would expect. It's not somebody standing there saying, you need to do this, this, and this. It's somebody saying, here's a microphone, here's some music, go and like share your gift. And I think that is the blessing of music and how it empowers. And that's the development of leadership that Ben Mays was talking about. Like there's nothing more powerful than standing in front of people as a 6-year-old and singing and people like clapping for you. What does that do for the soul? What does that do for your sense of worthiness or validation, right? It allows you to walk in a way that maybe if you hadn't had that experience, you wouldn't believe that people see you. But she feels seen. I mean, even the two bigger ones in the back who were like, I was just like, that brought me so much joy to be able to see the tradition of music and youth development continue. And they had this window in the back, which again, to me, talks about the collective practice, the collective rituals that was donated from people in Wales. And they wanted to be very intentional about like celebrating and acknowledging the gift of the church. And they donated this window to replace the window that had been blown out, right? And so there is a connection that happens, right? This idea of being in space with each other and celebrating and hearing from each other is not something I think you can teach, but I think it's something you can feel. And music allows us to feel the joy and the pain that folks may share. And so just sharing my own experience with my grandmother, and my sisters are both musicians now, sing and do that professionally. And I just remember being so angry with my mother pretty much every Sunday morning when she was like, get up, you know, like we have to go to church, you know, like get up, this is what we're doing. And then even more so, when I would be like, I want to go with my friends after church, and she'd be like, no, because we have another service after that. And now I think it is the greatest gift that she ever gave me. That being in place with the people, the music, I am amazed how much I remember from my childhood. Like the things that I didn't know what they were then, that now I'm like, oh my gosh, that was honestly a gift. So I think about specifically my grandmother, who I can remember, and I don't even remember, like, I don't know why this one particular song stays with me. And typically when I am in one of my deepest funk, I can really hear my grandmother, and I can think about, I tell people all the time, my grandmother did manual labor. And so I could always tell where she was working by how she looked when she came home. So when she worked in the cotton mill, she'd come home and she'd have like just cotton everywhere. And I just remember thinking it was hilarious that, she just had all night, we would be picking bits of cotton off of her clothes or her hair. When she worked for Texas Instruments doing calculators and putting those together, there would be like these metal bits in her hair. Like, I just remember that very fondly and being like, what? And later I would realize it was because she was doing the piece where they were like kind of shining things up and things would spit off. And then she'd come home, she'd help people get their insulin, she'd cook for folks, she'd do all these things. And I don't know if anybody else had this experience. I would remember her coming home, and it would be a storm, much like today, but lightning and all the other things. And at the time, it was just normal. It didn't faze me. But now I realize, like, she didn't have heat. So she would turn the oven on and open the oven door. And that's how we heated the house, or at least the area that we were in. And even in all those moments, I can like hear her, have you any river that seems uncrossable? Have you any mountain that you can't tunnel through? God specializes in things that are so impossible, and he can do what no other power can do. That, to this day, in the moments when I'm like, I don't think I can make it, when my heart hurts so bad, I think I make more probably in a year than my grandmother made in the last 20 years of her life. And if I am going to be sad and think that I cannot get over something, I just hear her, God specializes, God specializes. She would just sing that. She would remind herself that even in this moment, even at this time, I'm going to be okay. And I'm like, if I have more resources, more access, more opportunities than she did, then clearly I can continue to believe that God specializes in whatever I need, it's going to be all right. And so that, to me, is like the true like essence of the power of music. And at the time, I maybe thought it was sad, but now I'm like, it brings me so much joy. And those tears, like in the moment afterwards, I was looking up this one, soon I will be done with the troubles of this world, troubles of this world, troubles of this world. Soon I will be done with the troubles of this world. I'm going home to live with God. I thought about it for the longest. I was like, that sings about death, but it's not. Literally, metaphorically, it gives us the opportunity to say, like, it won't always be bad. This is a moment in time. Soon I will be done with these troubles. Soon I will be okay. And now I'm honestly like, no, as the kids say to me, no joke. Like, I sing those songs and I feel better. Now I understand why my grandmother would be walking through the house singing those songs. That is the power. And when you do it collectively, it is transformative, because now we realize, oh, we're all in a place where we know things are going to get better. And I'm not alone in my hoping and and dreaming and wishing. And so I want to share the importance and the power of Sunday school for me on a personal level. So when I was growing up, so those songs, I learned those songs in church. The poetry and things that I know, even to this day, when I was growing up in school, they didn't have ethnic studies, they didn't have Black history, they didn't have those pieces. So if I didn't go to church on Sunday, or if I didn't have to learn a poem for Mother's Day or Black History Month or Easter, I wouldn't know many of the poems that I know today. Langston Hughes and Maya Angelou, like those are my like all-time favorites. And Mahalia Jackson, like those are things that I learned in church, and they were always like put together in a program or a play or something, and having to learn the poems meant I was practicing my reading, right? And it wasn't because I wanted to be, if I'm honest, it wasn't because I wanted to do my poem really well. It was because I knew my mother would kill me if I did not do my poem really well, right? And I often joke with my mom and say, statute of limitations is over. I can tell them that, you know, you probably threatened me with a pinch or something, you know, to say, if you don't, you got to get it right. But it didn't matter, because even if I messed it up, people in the church would still clap and celebrate. And so there are like certain things that I remember very strongly still. And as I grew up and became a kindergarten teacher, one of my favorite books is Life Doesn't Frighten Me at All, which is a Maya Angelou poem that is turned into a book with illustrations from Basquiat. And like there's a line in that poem that I always go to that says, "Don't show me frogs and snakes and listen for my screams. If I'm afraid at all, it's only in my dreams. I can walk the ocean floor and never have to breathe. Life doesn't frighten me at all." And the line that sticks out for me is, if I'm afraid at all, it's only in my dream. That we have made it so hard for people to dream, that we have normalized poverty and homelessness and all of those things, but we're afraid to dream and make of what it might look like to make that not a reality, because we're afraid of disappointment. And so that poem, I used it all the time when I taught kindergarten, because it starts off with bad dogs barking loud, big ghost in a cloud. Life doesn't frighten me at all. The perfect poem I always felt like for the first day of kindergarten, where folks are afraid and scared to come in. And I learned that when I was little. This poem that I learned, that I definitely learned from when I was 8, church, Black History program, and I can see myself standing on the podium and like watching my mom. So this is probably why it's like burned into my head. And for the longest, I thought it was called Dream Deferred, and it's actually called Harlem. And when I thought about it, it's like he is talking about Harlem's dream deferred, this poem by Langston Hughes, which says, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it sags like a heavy load, or does it explode?" Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I rise. Those are all things that I continue to take with me through life, but I actually learned them in Sunday school in preparation for something. Those were the tools that like transformed my life. I will say the Phenomenal Woman one, when they made me learn that, I may have been like 13, 14. And I was like, oh, how can I say this in church? Because there are parts of it that talk about like the diamonds and where they meet in her body and like the bosom. And I was like, oh my God, I cannot do this in front of the whole. I was like, why are y'all making me do this? I was so even to this day, I'm like, the only line I like feel comfortable is, I'm not cute I'm not built. Wait, now I'm like, oh my God, my mom would kill me. Pretty women wonder where my secret lies. See, I'm not cute or built to suit a fashion model size. But when I try to tell them, they think I tell it lies. Like that part there, in those moments when I feel the ugliest of ugly, I say to myself, pretty women wonder where my secret lies. See, I'm not cute or built to, like it's not about how you look. I have to remind myself. There is something special within you, no matter what you look like, no matter what you feel like. Like that's what that poem gave to me. And then I'll share these last two because I want to make sure, Tanya, you let me know with time. When I started teaching, I discovered a poet and a book of poems by a woman of the name Eloise Greenfield. And I loved this. The title poem is called Honey, I Love. And I love a lot of things. Like my cousin comes to visit, and you know he's from the South, because every word he says just kind of slides out of his mouth. I like the way he whistles and I like the way he walks. But honey, let me tell you that I love the way he talks. I love the way my cousin talks. And that was like, that is, even though I'm born and raised in Texas, every time I go back home, I'm like, these people's accents are super heavy. Like, and there's something like, I'm like, my sisters talk to me and I'm like, what are they saying? Right? And there is something that is like, I love the way they talk. And then I'm like, I'm a little jealous. Like, shouldn't I have a little twang? What happened to my accent? And then there's another one that's in there that says, the day is hot and icky and the sun sticks to my skin. Mr. Davis turns the hose on and everybody jumps right in. The water stings my stomach and it feels so nice and cool. Honey, let me tell you that I love a flying pool. I love to feel a flying pool. And I'm like, that every time I go to Texas, I'm like, see, please, somebody get out the water hose and like spray us down because it is hot, right? That was this beginning of a love for poetry that happened in Sunday school that I realized this is how I learn. If I share these tools with my students, it will be transformative. And Harriet Tubman was that poem that helped me realize it. So it was, I was teaching kindergarten, I think it was my first year. And the poem goes, Harriet Tubman didn't take no stuff, wasn't scared of nothing neither. Didn't come in this world to be no slave and didn't stay one either. Farewell, she sang to her friends one night. She was mighty sad to leave them, but she ran away that hot, dark night, ran looking for her freedom. So the poem goes on, and a few days, weeks later, somebody comes in, one of the fathers of the student in my class comes in and he says, oh, my son is just talking about this horse that you guys have been like, talking about. He's like, you got to tell me. I just don't, this horse is amazing. I want to know more about this horse. And he keeps going on. I was like, I'm not sure what, because I know we had done some stories about Native Americans and some other, there was one about this beautiful, I was like, I'm not sure, but I don't know what the horse, and he's like, yes, he just every night talks about this horse, talks about this horse. And I said, oh, he said, well, the horse's name is Harriet. And I was like, Harriet Tubman? And he said, yeah. I said, well, she's not a horse. He said, well, she carried people to freedom. And I said, she did, but not on her back. And that's when I realized, like, I didn't have to come in and say, like, this is who Harriet Tubman is. But that poem generated something in a way that a lesson or a lecture never would have, right? The constant repetition of that made a transformative difference. And so when I got older, I discovered Florence Mills, who, was in the 20s and could have been a flapper. And some folks argue she is who Betty Boop is modeled after, for folks who are familiar with Betty Boop. Goes back and forth, Josephine Baker, Florence Mills, but she desegregated, she was a performer and she wanted to go perform, and they told her, even, this is long before Brown versus Board of Education or anything else, and she says, I'm not performing if you don't let the crowds, integrate. And she was like 12 at the time. And they did it. And so I have this book I discovered was about Florence Mills. And it talks about her finding the power of her voice, and that she was sitting by the window one day and started singing at home, and her family was like, oh, you're good. You're talented. And that was the change and the difference for her. And so this last one I'll kind of leave with is Fannie Lou Hamer, who was an activist for voting rights. Nina Simone, who had like Young, Gifted, and Black, and all these other songs. But Fannie Lou Hamer was like not going to stop letting her light shine, and was known for singing, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light. I'm this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. So music is a tool. It is how you can shine your light. It is how we can change the world. It is how we can help others find hope in the midst of darkness. So thank you for having me this morning.